friggin' love the Dynasty Warriors series. However, it's a series that doesn't exactly have a really great reputation, so a lot of people have, well, kind of avoided and ignored the series. They hear it's bad, so why would they even give it a glance? That is, until the recent announcement of Hyrule Warriors, which has caused people to look at it and suddenly go, wow, this looks really awesome and neat. Why do people say this is bad? This looks great. Meanwhile, the people who are pretty darn familiar with the Dynasty Warriors series look at Hyrule Warriors and go, yeah, that looks like more of the same Dynasty Warriors bullshit, mindless button-mashing nonsense. Why does anyone like this series? Why did they keep making these things? And well, as a fan of the series, I feel like answering both questions. However, in order to understand this, we're going to have to go back to the 90s. You see, way back in the 90s, beat-em-ups were king. They were all over the friggin' arcades. There were tons of them. However, many people seem to falsely believe that beat-em-ups evolved into fighting games. This is actually pretty stupid. Beat-em-ups and fighting games were invented around the same time. The two genres have similarities, but are distinctly different. And, yeah, no, they coexisted for basically the entire existence of beat-em-ups. I mean, like I said, they were created around the same time. So what happened to beat-em-ups? Well, the genre didn't really evolve. The grand majority of them played exactly the same. And when I say exactly the same, I mean shallow as a fucking puddle. What few actually did add in special moves and combos were either incredibly hard to find and or didn't make it very clear that they had deeper mechanics to them. However, the big thing that really destroyed the beat-em-up genre was the advent of 3D polygonal graphics. Back then, we thought 3D was the greatest thing ever. I mean, it was something fresh and new. It looked completely different from what we'd been playing before. And as such, we stupidly believed that anything that was 2D was old and out of date and looked bad. Anything that was 3D was fantastic and amazing and instantly better just because it's 3D. And, well, beat-em-ups strangely just didn't make the transition to 3D, and what few came out, and they were few and far between, weren't very good. Fighting Force here is widely regarded as one of the best 3D beat-em-ups released on the PS1. And while I can see why people liked it in the past, playing it now, the controls are sluggish and clunky, and the combat is, well, just as shallow as your average 2D beat-em-up. Meanwhile, Die Hard Arcade, one of the best 3D beat-em-ups ever made, is about on par with the average 2D beat-em-up, which we already established was shallow and generic. There were a million of them. And Gekido here was almost as good as Die Hard Arcade. It really surprised me, but let me recap there. Gekido, which came out in 1999, was almost as good as a game that was about as good as the average 2D beat-em-up. Yeah, we didn't see a lot of evolution here. Oh yeah, sure. There was Guardian Heroes, which was one game, and it was 2D on the Saturn. Yeah, so there was kind of a beat-em-up drought throughout the 90s. That is, until the launch of the PS2, with Dynasty Warriors 2, the first entry of the series. Let me explain. You see, the first Dynasty Warriors was actually a 3D fighting game called Sengoku Musou in Japan. Dynasty Warriors 2 was called Shin Sengoku Musou. So it was kind of a spin-off of the first Dynasty Warriors game, which quickly overtook the series. Anyway, people saw this and they were like, wow, wait, this is something fresh and new. It's like a beat-em-up, but instead of narrow corridors where you fight a handful of enemies, here you have a wide-open field you can roam around with hundreds, an entire army of enemies to fight. And the character selection, I mean, at the start, you only had 9 characters, but eventually you unlocked over 20 characters in Dynasty Warriors 2. And in Dynasty Warriors 3, the game that really put the series on the map, they cranked that number up to 45, with each character having their own story mode and ending. Most beat-em-ups only had like 3 characters if you were lucky. 8 characters was considered a huge number. 45 characters. That's fucking nuts. And the combat, oh yeah, sure, it's shallow and button mashy compared to maybe some modern games, but compared to the average beat-em-up, look, the grand majority of beat-em-ups, 90% of them, had a standard punch combo. They had a jump attack. They had a press attack and jump simultaneously to do a spinning move that drains some HP but gets the enemies off of you. And if you were lucky, they had a dash attack. That was it. Beat-em-ups were shallow as fuck. They had some throws, too. Meanwhile, though, Dynasty Warriors, well, you've got your standard combo, but then you have the special move button. And depending on where in the combo you press the special move button, determines which special move you do. Now, yes, there were some beat-em-ups that had, like, weak and strong or punch and kick buttons, and if you pressed them in different sequences, you would do different attack chains. But in reality, that didn't make much of a difference. It was basically just a different animation that did different damage to the same attack. Whereas the special moves in Dynasty Warriors were actually special. Like, one of them might be a spinning claw attack that lets you get into a group of enemies while damaging them. Another might be a Berserker Barrage-style rapid slash, while yet another might be a launcher that knocks the enemy up into the air, allowing them to be juggled or air comboed. While the mechanics of Dynasty Warriors may not be the deepest around, they were way, way deeper than the average beat-em-up, than the majority of beat-em-ups. But there was one thing, one major thing that Dynasty Warriors got right, that every attempt to modernize beat-em-ups fucked up. Dynasty Warriors, every single one of them, with the exception of Strike Force, because it was a rush port of a PSP game, every single Dynasty Warriors game, since their inception, has two-player split-screen co-op play. Now, that may not sound like a lot to some people, so what? I don't really play games cooperatively with friends. But to a lot of people, especially in the West, that's what sold them on Dynasty Warriors. That's what made Dynasty Warriors to them. Because think about the PS2 era. There were very, very few split-screen co-op games back then. Even now, oh sure, we see a lot, and I mean a lot, more co-op games these days, but most of them are online. Local couch co-op with split-screen, you rarely see that. And yes, some modern Dynasty Warriors games have online co-op too. They are implementing that. But two-player split-screen couch co-op is like a guarantee in every Warriors game. And here's the thing. Like I said, every attempt to modernize the beat-em-up fucked this up. For some inexplicable reason, people kept thinking, you know what would make beat-em-ups modern and fresh and new and appeal to a modern, more sophisticated audience? What if we focused on a single character and their backstory and fleshed out the world and made it a single-character, single-player game? Final Fight Streetwise, Golden Axe Beast Rider, heck, even Fighting Force and Gekido, which I mentioned at the beginning, did this. And Gekido at least had an excuse, because it was on GBA when they made the sequel there. But Fighting Force 2 focuses on bland-ass over here shooting rocket launchers and shit. What? Even Tekken Force Mode made this fuck up when it became the Devil Within in one of the Tekken games. I think it was 5. You see what I mean, though? A lot of the people that love beat-em-ups love them because they could play them cooperatively. The beat-em-up genre may well have even invented co-op play, and if it didn't invent co-op play, it certainly popularized the concept. What people want out of a modernized beat-em-up is more characters, more moves, and more players. And Dynasty Warriors was one of the only damn series to actually get this right. Dynasty Warriors came the fuck out of nowhere, and it was the game that put Koei on the map. Prior to this, they were just known as this bizarre, small niche company that made these super deep, overcomplicated strategy games, usually based on history, especially Romance of the Three Kingdoms. They loved Romance of the Three Kingdoms. Well, Dynasty Warriors even being based on it. So no one expected them to make a fast-paced, super flashy hack-and-slash beat-em-up with driving ass-rock music blaring through the speakers. It was completely unexpected and became a huge hit in Japan. And while it only has sort of a cult following in the States, in Japan it is still a huge hit. I joke about it being the Madden of Japan, and it is kind of that big of a deal with it. different stores running special promotions, friggin' 7-Up outfits, not to mention the special editions that come in fancy box sets and things. People in Japan really love Dynasty Warriors, and it elevated Koei from being some small niche company to being one of the most successful game companies in Japan, to the point where they bought out and kind of fixed Tecmo. So, hey, Dynasty Warriors actually sounds pretty awesome. Why would anyone not like this? Well, you see, shortly after the release of Dynasty Warriors 3 came Dynasty Warriors 3 Extreme Legends. Then Dynasty Warriors 4, Dynasty Warriors 4 Extreme Legends, Dynasty Warriors 4 Empires, Samurai Warriors, Samurai Warriors Extreme Legends, Samurai Warriors Empires, Dynasty Warriors 5, Dynasty Warriors 5 Extreme Legends, Dynasty Warriors 5 Empires, Samurai Warriors 2, Samurai Warriors 2 Extreme Legends, Samurai Warriors 2 Empires. You get the picture. In fact, this year alone, they've already released Dynasty Warriors 8 Extreme Legends. They just released Dynasty Warriors Gundam Reborn. We've got Hyrule Warriors coming in September, along with Warriors Orochi 3 Ultimate, and sometime, I believe this year, should be Samurai Warriors 4. That's 5 Dynasty Warriors games that I can think of off the top of my head that came out this year. I joke about Dynasty Warriors being the Madden of Japan, but really, they do release more Dynasty Warriors games per year than Maddens. And here's the thing, it's very easy to burn yourself out on these. I mean, they're beat-em-ups. Have you ever played a beat-em-up for an extended period of time? They do get boring. It's kind of the nature of the beast. At Dynasty Warriors, this is especially true because they kind of have some addictive elements that'll keep you playing for a while until you realize, wow, I'm really fucking bored of this and don't want to play another one ever again. This is the thing, people do get tired of them. And while there are deeper mechanics, especially in some of the recent games, you can get by just mashing the weak attack button. There's also the fact that while the series has evolved, the evolution has been incredibly slow. The difference between Dynasty Warriors 3 and Dynasty Warriors 4 was minuscule, and many people considered it a downgrade because Dynasty Warriors 4 had lengthy single Empire story modes that you could play like any character in the Empire in, rather than the 45 individual character story modes. Meanwhile, Dynasty Warriors 5 didn't really seem all that different from Dynasty Warriors 4. And comparing Dynasty Warriors 3 to Dynasty Warriors 5, yeah, you can see the differences. Way better graphics, more enemies on screen at once. The combat has been refined to be much more juggle-centric. You can juggle much better in Dynasty Warriors 5 than you can in 3. But considering the amount of time between 3 and 5, it was so slow and so gradual to make such a minor upgrade that, yeah, Dynasty Warriors, each one really does feel like the same damn thing. And a lot of people just wonder what the heck is the point to fighting all the grunts, too. I mean, there are weak points to the series. There's also the fact that stages tend to drag on for like a half a freaking hour. And most of the enemies are a friggin' cakewalk. It takes no effort to fight them. And then you could just run into one boss that's ridiculously superpowered and takes you out in a couple hits, like 25 minutes in, and now you have to start the whole stage over again, which can be incredibly aggravating. There's also the fact that Dynasty Warriors isn't exactly a AAA game. These are made to sell in Japan and make money in Japan with a single company making it. It's a very self-sufficient series, and business-wise, this is great. But if you're splitting hairs about frame rates and resolutions and shaders, oh my shit, Dynasty Warriors is going to piss you off. Because the main focus is on getting as many enemies on screen at once. That is the core focus of Dynasty Warriors, at the expense of almost everything else. As such, much of the environments don't look very good. The frame rate sometimes dips, there is slowdown, and yeah, it doesn't have a lot of fancy shaders or volumetric lighting and shit like that. It can be graphically unimpressive, and the AI isn't always exactly intelligent. It's a little bit on the rough side. Also, let's not forget that Dynasty Warriors is loosely based on history, namely the book Romance of the Three Kingdoms. As such, every Dynasty Warriors game is actually retelling the exact same story and the exact same battles. Every game has the Battle of Chibi where the boats are set on fire. Every game starts with like the Yellow Turban Rebellion or the battle at Hulao Gate and fighting Dong Zhuo, and here comes Lu Bu, and you are actually playing a remake of the exact same story. Recent games have tried to expand beyond that, going into the sequel book to Romance of the Three Kingdoms and talking about the rise of the Kingdom of Jin, but even then, yeah, every Dynasty Warriors is kind of a remake of itself, and couple that with it being a beat-em-up, which is a rather repetitive genre in and of itself, and yes, the games can get very repetitive, though that is somewhat limited to the core Dynasty Warriors series, I understand. Which would make you think that a company like, say, Capcom could one-up Dynasty Warriors no problem. Indeed, there have been many attempts to overtake Dynasty Warriors, but let's recap. What is it that makes Dynasty Warriors great? Well, you fight a ton of enemies, you've got a decently sized moveset, you've got a ton of characters, and above all else, 2-player split-screen local co-op. Now, Capcom probably created the most successful Dynasty Warriors clone, the closest anyone ever came to cloning it. However, even they fucked this up. The first Sengoku Basara seems good, it has way better graphics, is super flashy, a much better stage design, more enemy variety, more interesting enemy AI. However, it had less characters, the combat, believe it or not, was way more shallow. It was just 2 different combo strings, a square button string and a triangle button string, and that was it. So it was really mashy and really shallow, and it did not have 2-player split-screen co-op. Now, the sequel fixed a lot of this. It really expanded the roster, it added the 2-player split-screen co-op, they were on a roll, and then in Sengoku Basara 3, they arbitrarily cut over half the cast for absolutely no good reason. Yes, I understand they were trying to move the story along, however, many of them were original characters that they did not need to cut. Oh, but they'll add them back in the Japanese-only expansion pack, only to cut them out again in Sengoku Basara 4. Capcom, this is why you're going out of business. So just sheer Capcom incompetence managed to sink what was probably the most promising attempt to dethrone Dynasty Warriors. 99 Nights was also another really good one. It has a much bigger moveset than Dynasty Warriors does, and the environments were much more varied and had more topography to them, and somehow they actually managed to get more enemies on screen at once. There was a bit more enemy variety than your average Dynasty Warriors too. However, once again, limited cast of characters. There were only like 6 stages in the entire game, many characters only having like 3 stages in their story mode, and once again, no 2-player split-screen co-op. And 99 Nights 2 was a completely different game that played much closer to Sengoku Basara and had an even smaller roster of characters that were significantly less varied, and the co-op play was online only in specially designated stages. This is why the Dynasty Warriors series remains on top, but did it ever evolve? Well, yes, after the massive fuck-up that was Dynasty Warriors 6. You see, Dynasty Warriors 6 was the first next-gen Dynasty Warriors. By that I mean 360 and PS3. As such, they had to rebuild all their data from scratch. They figured, let's be more historically accurate, give people like historically accurate weapons and stuff, redesign everyone, completely redo everything. And people hated it because the combat actually got way more shallow. Once again, it was a lot like Sengoku Basara. You had an X button combo, you had a Y button combo, and that was basically it. The cast shrank, the moveset shrank, and there was much backlash. However, around the same time, Dynasty Warriors Gundam was also created, which tried to actually do some new and different things, and began to experiment. It was more experimental, because, I mean, when you make a new sub-series of the Dynasty Warriors series, you have to do something to differentiate it from the other Dynasty Warriors games. They did that with Gundam. Not only did it have a booster system and the ability to mix and match pilots with different mobile suits, but it introduced the base conquering system, which actually gave people a reason to fight enemy grunts. Basically, the area is divided up into multiple bases. These bases spawn in generic troop. When you go into a base, though, there's a meter which drains as you beat up the generic troops. Once the meter is drained, the base guardian shows up, you beat the base guardian, and you conquer that base. It now not only spawns your own troops, but gives a stat boost to everyone in your army. You, anyone who might be playing with you, and all of your generic troops, while simultaneously decreasing the stats of everyone in the enemy army, both their generals and their generic troops, giving you a reason to conquer the bases in order to make the enemies far easier to beat, and thus a reason to actually beat up the generic troops. Added a degree of strategy to it, as enemies would try to retake the bases that you had just reclaimed. This would be implemented in many of the Dynasty Warriors spin-off games because it was a really good idea. Also, around this time, they created Warriors Orochi, which was basically recycled Data Warriors. They took all the old character models and movesets from Dynasty Warriors and Samurai Warriors, made up a few original ones, slammed them together, let players make teams of 3 characters that you could switch between in sort of a tag system, mid-friggin' combo. It was basically the Marvel vs. Capcom 2 of Dynasty Warriors. Fuck balance, fuck logic, just 3-player teams that you switch between. This introduced the idea of different classes for different characters, the ability to double jump and maybe even double jump cancel, but the big thing was the ability to switch between movesets in the middle of a combo. This would then be implemented again in Dynasty Warriors Strike Force, which was sort of an attempt to do a Dynasty Warriors Monster Hunter, except everyone flies around and goes Super Saiyan. I'm not even kidding about that. This was based on Dynasty Warriors 6 at its core. However, it implemented the ability to equip characters with a second weapon, and they could switch between their weapons in the middle of a combo, as well as implementing command special moves. Also, it introduced the ability to lock the camera onto enemy generals. This all came together to produce what is almost undeniably the deepest and most awesome combat system in the history of Dynasty Warriors, which makes me kind of angry that we got screwed out of Strike Force 2. This all would then come back together in Dynasty Warriors 7, which had a little bit of the base conquering, but did implement the weapon switching ability, along with the idea of giving different weapons, in this case different classes. You had power weapons and speed weapons. Power weapons create these tornadoes as they're used, which breaks enemy defenses and increases their range, whereas speed weapons give you the ability to double jump and jump cancel. Also, when you switch weapons, there's a special weapon switching attack that you do. Some weapons do special things when you switch to them, others do different things when you switch from them, some do even both, and there's some really interesting combinations there, which suddenly made the combat way, way deeper and more interesting, opening the floodgates for some really crazy combo opportunities in Dynasty Warriors 7 and 8. So the series has certainly evolved throughout time. However, this does raise the very important question of where exactly the challenge is in Dynasty Warriors. I mean, the thing that defines this series is the fact that you're taking on armies of hundreds, even thousands of enemies, and cutting through them like they were friggin' butter. I mean, what's the point? They don't pose much of a threat or a challenge, right? And admittedly, in some of the earlier Dynasty Warriors games, you can kind of completely ignore the grunts, just go up to the generals and fight them. However, in the modern Dynasty Warriors games, they've drastically cranked up the number of enemy generals and important targets you're supposed to fight, as well as cranking up the number of generic troops there are. So the generic troops are getting in the way of you trying to fight those generals, and thus you have to cut through them. There's also the fact that various sub-objectives constantly pop up while you're in the middle of a mission. You might be fighting along and all of a sudden, oh crap, catapults are going off. You need to veer off and take care of those catapults. And now one of your generals is in trouble, and you need to rush over there and defend that general and take out any grunts that might give the general mosquito bites. And then you're like, oh crap, I need to open this door. Oh crap, I need to get to this place in this time. Dynasty Warriors Gundam Reborn, in fact, cranked this up to freaking 11 with the sheer number of sub-objectives. And some of the spin-off titles, as I mentioned, have the whole base conquering thing. So you're constantly trying to conquer bases in order to boost your stats and boost the strength of your army, defend bases, make sure that your home point doesn't get taken. Really, it's not about fighting each individual enemy, rather it's about taking out as many enemies as you can, as fast as you can. It's about crowd control and strategically choosing where you need to go and who you need to fight. And oh geez, I didn't even get into the friggin' RPG and upgrading elements, which also attracts a lot of people. Yeah, characters can be leveled up, you can collect different weapons. Some games let you combine weapons to add different stats and abilities to them. Other games use bizarre level up systems that involve coins or Gundam parts or... Yeah, there's a lot of crazy upgrade systems. It is the most noticeable difference between each of the games. So it's at this point you might be saying, wow, Dynasty Warriors actually sounds pretty darn awesome. Which game should I use to get into the series? Well, I'm going to tell you right now, if you're waiting on Hyrule Warriors, just go with that one. Look, your first Dynasty Warriors is going to be the one you enjoy the most, because everything is fresh and new and different. You can't compare it to any other entries in the series. And the big thing, as I said, the big #1 problem with Dynasty Warriors is that it is way, way too easy to burn yourself out on these things. If you go into Dynasty Warriors now and then get Hyrule Warriors, chances are you'll have already burnt yourself out on it and you'll find Hyrule Warriors to be really, really boring and samey and just completely quit the series. So if you're a fan of Zelda and you're hyped about Hyrule Warriors, wait until Hyrule Warriors. However, if that's not your modus operandi, well, the one that I'd tell you to avoid is Dynasty Warriors 6 and 2. The Empires series is kind of its own thing. It's got this strategy element to it where you're trying to conquer the world. It's actually kind of awesome. I started actually enjoying them with Dynasty Warriors 7, but generally speaking, I would go with core numbered entries. If you're a fan of Gundam, One Piece, or Fist of the North Star, then totally go with the licensed ones, because they're actually pretty darn fun if you're a fan of the series. But I would only really recommend them then. I actually think Fist of the North Star in particular felt a little sluggish to me, and I was not a fan of it. But I have a friend who's a huge fan of Fist of the North Star, and he doesn't normally like Dynasty Warriors, but he was all over that and just couldn't stop screaming about how amazing that game was. So if you're a fan of the series, yeah, totally go ahead. And can I just say, is it just me, or does the whole licensed Warriors game thing kind of remind ya of all those licensed beat-em-ups back in the 90s, like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, X-Men, and The Simpsons? I mean, I'm not even entirely convinced that X-Men isn't a Warriors game, considering how many Sentinels there are on screen. Other than that, yeah, numbered entries. The Extreme Legends expansion packs are kind of a weird thing, because, like, you're supposed to have the first game first and then get the expansion pack. They sort of combine together in a weird way. So the core numbered entries are your best bet. If you have a PS4, go ahead, go with Dynasty Warriors 8 Complete will be awesome. If you want one on the cheap, though, to just test the waters, go ahead and pick up Dynasty Warriors 7. Admittedly, the evolution is slow. I think the graphics are significantly improved between 7 and 8, but the differences between them are minor. Like, 8 introduced a weird rock, paper, scissors system with the weapons. It expanded the story mode more to make them more historically accurate, but there's ways to, like, subvert history in order to get a happy ending, because the games are actually based on pseudo-historical events from the novel Romance of the Three Kingdoms. And as such, each game is actually the same exact story playing out, but in, like, actual history, a lot of people died, and so you would lose characters and the ending isn't necessarily happy. So there's these alternate history routes and a secondary ending where everyone survives and everything is happy, which I actually thought was a pretty fun little twist on it. But yeah, generally speaking, the difference between 7 and 8 is relatively minor, so go with either of them. Or if you're more interested in Japanese history, yeah, Samurai Warriors 4 is coming soon. Anyway, that's a pretty good idea of what Dynasty Warriors is all about, why I like it, and why a lot of people hate it. Anyway, this is Gel, and I hope I answered your question, and you've been GameBabbled. See ya!